Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jake. Good to be here.
No, thank you. So let's start here. You stopped giving a fuck a long time ago. Why?
Well, you gave me a disclaimer on anything can be edited or discarded. It's like, I'm not going to rug pull you on the content, mate. So let's see how we go.
Sure. Nathan, you kindly joined me on Bitcoin with Jake now 3 years ago. I guess it's
2021, mate. It was nearly 4 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
You feeling old?
A lot goes by, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that always drew me to your story in particular was this idea of having worked in the investment market and now you're a Bitcoin bull. And so let's just start there briefly. It's maybe as you described before, slightly vanilla story in a sense, but there are people who are listening that don't really know what that means and who you are. So that would be a great starting point, and we'll see where it takes us.
Yeah, sure. So I worked in, I guess you call it traditional finance or TradFi. That was my career. Worked in an investment bank, and then I worked for some family offices, mostly in real estate. And I got to work be based in the markets of Sydney and then London and then Melbourne. I did some work up in Northeast Asia. So I worked in China, I worked in Japan. I did some deals in Korea while based in Sydney. And I've been doing a little bit of startup stuff over the years as well. So businesses in the UK and in America. And I came to Bitcoin kind of through that. And I suppose the challenge for me in that sense was learning all the technical aspects of it and try to get a sense of who I could listen to and trust. And I've had some incredible mentors on that front that I'm super grateful for. I suppose I came to it more from a finance perspective. And then, of course, they never teach you about money. So I worked in finance all my career, and I never really thought about what is money. Luckily, through a kind of series of coincidences, I fell down the Austrian economics rabbit hole, and for a little while I invested in gold, and I had a bunch of mates that we would just kind of shoot the breeze on things Austrian economics and the kind of distortions in the modern economy and the modern monetary system. So I think I sort of was primed from that to come to Bitcoin, and I kind of understood the value of a fixed money supply, and I understood the problems, I guess, to some extent of the current fiat monetary setup, wherein the money that we use has no backing, there's nothing behind it, there's nothing preventing the central banks and governments and commercial banks from creating as many dollars or euros or yen as they wish to. The constraint, you might say, is price inflation, but of course they mask those statistics very, very sneakily. And so there's the increase in the money supply over decades has been enormous. So I kind of was aware of those issues and understood to some level the root causes of them. And I could see how Bitcoin would help to engender a far fairer financial system. And, with money being the root of all human cooperation, it ought to, over a period of time, engender a far fairer world than we have these days.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting parts of that Bitcoin, the Bitcoin journey, shall we say, is the idea what is someone can just print money for fun. What the actual fuck?
It's working for it, mate. I'll tell you that.
Well, doesn't it? Absolutely. It's like, hang on, so I have to work for my money, but someone else can print money. And then when you start thinking about the quantities that it gets done in, and how many human hours can be printed at the press of a button, and the speed with which that money can be deployed in areas that benefit that small group of people before anyone else has realized. It's so unfair is the point. And it's why it's so frustrating when people kind of hit me with Bitcoin critiques that are about inequality. So, the insiders are going to win, fuck off. It's like, you clearly don't understand what you're talking about.
Well, we are going to win, but you can also be an insider and you can also win.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's true. And so when you say Bitcoin is fairer, How has that impacted your life?
I'd say I have a reasonable sense of justice.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether that was kind of innate or whether it was a product of, family values and conditioning through the education system. But it does stick in my craw that you can have these bankers and finance types and others that kind of lord it over the people who you might say do the real work. The people who are firefighters, emergency response people, farmers, tradespeople of all
people
stripes. Exactly. Like they sort of deliver the everyday things that energy producers. They deliver things that are genuinely of great value to all of us in our modern, comfortable lives, and they get out and they have to earn it, and often it's pretty hard work. They're kind of lorded over and disadvantaged relative to some hedge fund manager or banker who's sitting there just being closer to, you might say, the money spigot. So the creation of new money, there are layers of how close you are to that, and you will benefit tremendously more if you are closer to the money printer than if you're further away. You'll get access to the new money first. You'll get far better credit terms. And so you can make a lot more money as a business, as an individual, and it's really just not justified. It's so unfair. So that sort of sticks in my craw, that kind of thing. And I think that if you have a monetary system that is more fair, where no organisation or person has the ability to create money out of thin air for their own benefit, it kind of gives a much more fair opportunity for people of all stripes and all careers to be able to make money and save money. And it just removes a lot of distortions that are in the current world and the current economy.
It's very interesting, isn't it? It's that, like, when I think of justice, it takes me in lots of directions, and some part of it is innate, isn't it? You can just tell. It's like that person. There was always that person at school that would lie and cheat, and you know who they've ended up being, right? And there was another person that had a sense of integrity that you could rely on in certain situations, and that was completely natural, right? I mean, put aside school as a discussion on a natural place to be or not. Maybe that's another way we can go. I'll jot that down.
Let's go.
That's very interesting to me, isn't it? And so people like yourself, and I feel similar in many ways. Now, are we right or wrong? That's probably another discussion altogether. But like, it feels very right to me to be drawn towards this idea of rules, not rulers. And there's that amazing Rothschild quote about, "I care not who wins an election. Give me the power to run the money supply, and I don't care about your law." And it's like, this has been going for hundreds of years.
It's been going on forever, mate. Like, since antiquity, the kings and princes had intellectual, advisors, court advisors, who would effectively justify why printing money, clipping coins in various forms, basically cheating the people out of a fair monetary system, why that was necessary and morally correct. Now, these days, since, say, the 20s, that's all Keynesianism. So it's all cloaked in this absolute garbage of mind-numbing equations and theory, none of which makes any logical sense whatsoever. But in the economics profession, you don't get a job, you don't get a professorship. You've got no chance of anything unless you subscribe to this Keynesian religion. And all it is just our modern version of the kings and princes, being the governments and central banks. And we can go into the Rothschilds and above of who really is potentially pulling the puppet strings. It's just their intellectual cloaking of printing money for their own benefit. So nothing's changed over the millennia. Just the form is different now.
And I think of it as just a classic case of getting something for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a self-interest within all humans that It's totally natural. And there's just a certain type of person, a certain group of legacy families that have figured it out, right? And they just continue to do so. It's quite extraordinary. Okay, so without let's continue to do that. So why is central banking such a problem?
Yeah, well, just on that comment you made before, humans forever have never been able to resist the temptation of printing money. So if you put me in charge of the money printer, we're talking about, Lord of the Rings, Frodo's got the ring. All right, it's very hard to resist that temptation. So why don't we just have a system where the temptation's gone? There's no human that is, that has the ability to create more money or to control the monetary system. Totally removes that temptation. So in terms of, why that's done, I think it definitely is to sort of create something for nothing. And it gets deep into human psychology, and it gets kind of pretty dark in terms of, I guess, that kind of element of evil that's in our world and is in every human. There's sort of the light and the darkness. And you might say, it seems that the people who are able to harness the control of the money supply perhaps are more minded or persuaded or innately drawn to the kind of evil side of controlling other human beings. And effectively, we have a system of slavery, being the modern system of money. And I like to point out to people that, say you go back to slavery in the American colonies. So you worked all day, you did not get paid, but you got food and board. So, you got something out of it. You're a slave. I don't think there's any debate that people put up these days that was, unfair and morally wrong. The modern person, take, for example, Australia, and you can look at different setups around the world, but take Australia where we are. If you're earning any sort of reasonable salary as a wage earner, you're losing, 40% plus in income taxes. You're losing 10% of sales tax on everything you spend. We have taxes on alcohol, tobacco. We have all sorts of luxury taxes on luxury cars and other specific items. All sorts of regulations, fees. Where do you even start? Capital gains, it's a ripper. And then, of course, the big hidden one that people don't really grasp or obviously never been taught about is inflation. So if the Australian monetary supply is inflating by 15% per annum, that is 15% of hidden theft of all of your savings just off the bat. So when you add up all of those things, you might be somewhere near, I say, 80% of what you earn. That's not, and yes, you get your food and board, right? You've got to pay your food and board out of the other 20%. So I think we're not that far away when you do those numbers from the system of slavery that existed in the American colonies.
And to add into that mix as well, the time required for those maths, for those figures to make sense, i.e. you get 22 days holiday a year plus weekends. So you're basically working all year.
Yeah.
I mean, I say all year, weekends actually adds up to quite a lot of days, right? But it's still, there's only so much you can do outside of the time when you're in a fiat employment contract. It basically takes all of your primary energy resources and your parenting skills, for example, or your own health and physical well-being is put to the side in favor of this fiat contract first. And it's interesting as well because the word slavery is so triggering.
Mm-hmm.
And people it's like saying that Melbourne was a medical apartheid, which it was for a period of time.
It certainly was.
And they're like, oh, you can't say that. It's like, well, it's not true. So maybe saying, we're all we're all fiat slaves as your opening statement at a dinner party isn't the way to go. But here, when we're on a podcast, we can talk about what the fuck we want. So it's interesting to me that this thing that you're highlighting, it seems so immoral, it seems so unjust, it is unfair. The people that run it are like probably on the evil end of things. Demons, and I'm with you on all of that. So two things I'm interested to talk to you about is one is like, how has your life changed as a result of figuring this out?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe part of that is also just digging into more details like why this system exists and who's in control.
That's a deep one. How's my life changed? Well, I think over the years of being involved in Bitcoin, it really, I think, is a source of light and hope in all of these topics and issues that we're talking about, and there are many more that can get quite dark. So I think Bitcoin gives you a mindset, and I think that mindset takes time to develop, and it certainly did for me. Took time to develop, of just being able to sort of opt out of all of the nonsense and pay it no attention, because you've got a form of money that you can save in, and you can preserve the value of what you have. You don't have to be so sort of wrapped up in the kind of control that others may have over you. So that may be that your bank that you owe a mortgage to effectively has control over you. Your employer has control over you. The laws of the government from time to time have some control over you. So I think it allows you sort of a sense of freedom if you really kind of let it percolate through you. And there are so many different domains of life that this can apply to. And once you start seeing some, and you kind of have that mindset going to others. So I think, something that you and I've talked about a lot is health, fitness, nutrition. So in Australia, we're taught the food pyramid, which is like you shall eat red meat very rarely, and you shall eat pasta and
lots of fucking greens,
Kellogg's cornflakes or whatever, and that's a healthy way to eat. You know what I mean? Actually, it's inverted, right? Your Kellogg's cornflakes or whatever, or your pasta is a treat. It's a sugary treat. And the base of a good diet, I believe, it's worked well for me, is heavy on meat, and in particular red meat. So that sort of, I think, puts you in a better, health and fitness, physical, mental kind of state. And that is a building block of so much in life. And then you start to get to a point, I guess, where you can just ignore what you might hear about, so-called nutritionists or so-called experts. You can kind of apply that mentality or that sort of willingness to question and explore and listen to other sources of information other than, media and government approved experts. So it does give you a sense of freedom in that sense, and a kind of a joy, because there are so many areas of life that these rabbit holes that open up of, I can go explore that, and there might be something really of interest there, and you come across gold dust sometimes, something that really you grab onto, and you've got that knowledge for your entire life. You can transmit that knowledge to your children. And improve their quality of life as well through having access to this kind of knowledge and experimentation. That it's a bit off-piste, and I think Bitcoin's obviously very off-piste for the average person of what it is and what it is looking to achieve. And then you take that sort of mentality of an open mind really into other domains, and you can get some pretty incredible things from it.
And this is why, Nathan, I find someone like yourself's story so compelling. And I know you don't tell it very often, right? My podcast is probably one of the few that you've been on. But it's basically this story of reconnection and regeneration, in a sense, in ourselves. And you can feel the change. And the reason I love these conversations is because this is like primary research. Go and ask people, how has your life improved? And as a investor, if that's what you want to call it, a capital allocator, like, how can you argue that someone who feels better and has researched things more deeply and understand the world around them better has made poor decisions? And it's normally someone who has no idea what the fuck they're talking about, that's barking at you about something that they're dead wrong about. So when I see like a nutritionist online now, it's kind of like how I look at an academic. Like you're paid by a system. One thing that I want to definitely delve into, and this is pretty like talk about off piece. This is fucking off piece. You sent me a podcast about circumcision. Would we?
I wondered if we go there. I wondered if we go there. Yes, we can go there. Yes,
if you're willing to.
Yep.
Only
yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And
yep.
I'll frame it like this, which is, I'm not circumcised, and
congratulations.
That was a choice my parents made. My father wasn't, or was, and I haven't even really talked to my mum about it. And like a lot of men, not really spent much time thinking about it.
You ask your mum. Ask your mum about what they were thinking. Was it a conscious decision, or was it just like dad?
No, I think
your dad's
not.
My
your
uncles
father wasn't. My father was circumcised, but my brother and I weren't.
It's interesting to ask your
because that's his to share. It was a Daniel Prince and Ben Howard conversation. Shout out to both those guys. I've learned a lot from them over the years with the content that's gone out, and Ben with his business and stuff. But the way that Ben was describing it was very, very, very hard to listen to because of how fucking full on it is.
Yeah, it's intense.
And I'll let you take it from there, Nathan, because it's something you've introduced me to as this is as dark and light as it gets, right? This is as intense as it gets.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is, I think, an example of a rabbit hole I never would have didn't even know it existed. And then listening to that podcast with Princey and Ben Howard, two guys I respect tremendously, and it's like, oh, okay, they're talking about this. I wonder if there's anything in it. So I listened to it, and it's like, gee, wow. And Ben Howard is an incredible source of knowledge on that front, like just oceans of knowledge. And some of it I've been able to kind of pick up and think about. But where to start? I suppose we tend to accept, I think in the Western world, we accept that female genital mutilation and the motivation behind that is horrific. But you raise the issue of male genital mutilation, and people will laugh at you. Women in particular, if I'm just laugh at you, and guys will too. What are you talking about? No one even knows it's a thing. But yet you've got babies who might be hours or days old, baby boys, who are having their genitals mutilated without any anesthetic, without any consent, of course, and really with their parents not making any conscious decision, and certainly not with any sort of valid information in many cases, that this is something that they should be doing. And there are active campaigns and government funding to promote it. And it's irreversible. Like you have just mutilated a young baby boy, in the most sort of sensitive and at his physical core in a way that is irreversible for his life. And yet we just tolerate this. We think, oh, it's normal, it's necessary, it's a health thing, it's a hygiene thing, it's a cosmetic thing. And we laugh about it when anyone says, well, hang on, this shouldn't be happening. It's incredible.
And why does it happen?
Oh, mate, hitting dark today. Where to go? Well, I guess a few things to say. Let me just speculate a couple of things, all right? And we'll,
mate, absolutely. What I'm most intrigued in is like intuition and an organic conversation. So really, whatever comes to mind, let's do it.
Well, we could say it's a humiliation ritual. We could say it's a
ritual.
Yeah, we could say it's a kind of initiation into slavery. We could say it's a way of, in a sense, emotionally neutering.
Yeah,
men.
Stunting. Yeah.
Stunting men. Yep. And then, male baby boys' foreskins are used in cosmetic procedures.
Wow.
So celebrities, for example, and there's evidence of this on the Oprah Winfrey Show, celebrities boasting and laughing, females laughing about using baby boy or extracts from baby boys' foreskins in cosmetics. It's a big business, mate. It's a big business. Yeah, there's a lot of there are a lot of financial incentives for hospitals and doctors to do this, particularly in America. America's sort of the root of all these things, it seems, funnily.
Wow. The land of the free.
Yeah. So there's a couple of thoughts on, why it might be happening. So I think it's a mixture of, like many things, like ignorance and then manipulation by hidden hands at the top.
And because it's this, I mean, oh my God, it's quite intense for me too, actually.
Well, you got away with it, mate. You haven't had to suffer it.
No, but that's absolutely true. I'm an uncircumcised man, but what I have a 5-month-old baby boy, and I clean his nappy every day. And after that podcast you sent me, I was like, "Fuck me," because Ben talks about how like literally 50% of the penis is removed, and I'm like, imagine basically chopping this in half, right? Fucking now,
16 square inches. Imagine like 4 inches of skin.
And I think if I could draw something from this, it's almost the key here is we'll never know exactly why it's happening. And what we can do is control what's within our vicinity. I immediately get drawn to the idea of like, a cosmetics business basically making shitloads of money. It's like, that's a very obvious incentive as to why it might be done. But it's the sense of complete autopilot in which it gets done that I think is so extraordinary, where people just don't think about it, or it's so deeply ingrained as to be normal. Why? And it's like, okay, how many other areas of your life is this going on? Well, one is we're all getting raped by taxes everywhere, every year, but we think we're free.
Yeah.
Like that is a complete dichotomy, right? You've already highlighted that. Another area would be infant vaccinations. Like just pumping these kids full of shit, right? From day one. And parents are like, oh, I've got to have childcare.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what are the impacts of all of those vaccinations over the first 15 years of their life? Can you give me a study that puts them all in one? They don't have it, right?
No.
And even the ones they do have studies of, it's the individual impacts of them, and they're paid for by the people that make money out of selling these things. And so I guess it's this sense of sleepwalking. And it really is like the Matrix, right? It's just, whoa.
The Matrix was a documentary. My 10-year-old lad, thank God, his mother and I decided not to have him circumcised, but we weren't aware of all this. I guess we had somewhat of a kind of natural health anti-intervention bent, but we didn't know the sort of extent and the kind of horror of what was put in front of us at that time. And thank God we dodged it. And that's the biggest thing, like we talk about money, we talk about nutrition, all these things. This is a rabbit hole 12 months ago I wasn't even aware of. And all that same mentality of incentives, the darkness, the sleepwalking, all applies. And people like you and me are completely oblivious to it. So how many other things out there are there that we're completely ignorant of, that if we were to become awake to,
you ask a very challenging question. One of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is to have hard conversations. I'm sure there are people out there that are doing podcasts and they've got a very specific type of person they want as a guest who has to have a certain number of digital followers.
That ain't me, mate. I'm not sure.
No, it's not.
I'm not sure.
This is probably already one of the best podcasts I've done in the first 20, right? Because this is real. This is seriously fucking real. And that's what this is all about. So I wonder, how do we survive? What is the toolkit to navigate this stuff? What's worked well for you, for example?
Yeah. Just to round off on that circumcision topic, so you should definitely have Ben Howard
on the pod. Yeah, sure.
If you've not done already,
I haven't.
So that's become a real passion of his and almost like a life objective to raise awareness to promote technologies and other things in that space to try and, I guess, firstly wake us all up, and then to take steps to prevent this kind of stuff. In terms of what guys can do about it, if you have been circumcised, in terms of what you can physically do, it is entirely possible to restore your foreskin. And there are small businesses that will sell you the equipment to do that. You should talk with Ben about that. He'll talk about it far more eloquently than me. And I should say, aside from Ben, there are a number of other guys across different countries that are really expert in this area. And yeah, I've gotten into that, and I suppose I'm sort of in the process of doing it, getting some decent results. It's not a short-term process. You've got to be reasonably committed, and it's going to take 12 months plus to get going. And then, so for guys who wanting to go down that path or experiment on that path, that's what we're doing. And in terms of, the benefits, sex is supposed to be more pleasurable for your girl, for yourself. It's really hard for us because we don't know what we missed out on. 16 square inches of the most sensitive nerve endings in the body. Well, that sounds like that could be pretty good. So you can do that. And then there's a company called Foregen, Foregen. That is a venture company that is working on surgically reattaching, or sort of, how would you say, surgically regenerating foreskins using stem cells. So that's where the intention is you'll get the full sensitivity, the full experience of having an intact foreskin through their surgical process. Now, they've had very successful animal trials using sheep, and I'm told that they are commencing human trials this year. So we'll be really interested to see how that all progresses. Hopefully it's successful. The procedures are refined, relatively, sort of light kind of surgery. You're just sort of implanting stem cells, and then that will grow over time into an intact foreskin. So, but Foreskin's kind of the only company out there that's doing it, because people just aren't aware. So getting the funding and getting the scientists and so forth to focus on it is a challenge. But it's very interesting that sort of research is happening. And, if you're a guy who was mutilated as a baby or as a child, or even as an adult, that happens as well, and you're interested in looking into this, then Foregen's well worth a look, to keep an eye on the space.
Well, thank you for sharing, Nathan. It's a really important topic to speak about. And it's actually one of those strange things, isn't it? Many twists and turns of the last couple of years. And this for me was really around like the COVID time. It's like, if you said that you didn't agree with the government, you were like a pariah, right? It's there's so much that was being unsaid. What I'm intrigued to understand a bit more about then is, like I mentioned this example earlier of like, okay, there's no study that shows the holistic impact of all the infant vaccines. Like if someone can find that for me and send it to me, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
But the like, let's say 75 shots that they have to have in those first 10 to 12 years of life, each one is an independent profit-making center. And above that, you've then got companies that own multiple different ones. So there is, in some sense, like a hierarchical ownership level to these different things that they're making money from. And let's just say that, like, the pharmaceutical industry that's making money from selling foreskin, infused face cream to Oprah Winfrey, and then the idea that there's people out there that are selling garbage as burgers, like the fake food market, and then you've got nutritionists telling everyone that this is the best thing you can possibly eat. It's like a repeated pattern, right? Where actually higher above that, there's probably people that are making money out of this, right? And then who's above them? So over the years of like going down these rabbit holes and absolutely happy to speculate, like, do you think there is one like group, them, that is like actively trying to control and manage this? And this idea of eugenics, like, crazy, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about it to say. I know there are different theories about this kind of thing. It's the old question, is it incompetence or is it malice? And the answer is yes. So I don't know. There definitely seems to be. I mean, just take, for example, right, public health policy before 2020 never included these so-called lockdowns. And yet we saw Western governments lockstep around the world within a very short time frame all implement these. Now that looks like coordinated response, which is clearly coming from above sovereign governments. So where was it coming from?
Well, my immediate reaction is the World Economic Forum and old mate Klaus and his globalist buddies in Europe. And there's, because there's very obvious connections to them, like people like Jacinda Ardern over in New Zealand or Trudeau or whatever. They're all the same people. And old mate Klaus is clearly videoed at his, World Economic Forum summit in Davos saying how we actually have about 50% of the cabinet who are world economic leaders. It's like a fucking Bond film. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. But I suspect
that's just my immediate thing. But it's like, really?
Yeah, I think it's too obvious. I think the people that would be orchestrating this would be well and truly in the shadows.
Yes.
Have a chance.
Yeah, what would be the benefit of being... They're basically... Klaus is their customer. Or they're Klaus's customer, perhaps.
Yeah, well, Klaus might be one of their go-to. But maybe
actually, that was an interesting story. I didn't massively follow this, but I'm very interested in Nostr, and I try and spend most of my time online, if I am browsing, so to speak, over on Nostr. And this USAID story that's been opened up, and the amount of funding that's been going from the United States Treasury to people like literally the BBC. It's absolutely insane how much money has been spent by these governments on independent media outlets.
So much of this crap, man, it just wears me out. I don't bother thinking about it. Just like when you even start, and then you scratch 1% of the surface of, like, USA. Okay, so that's what we're allowed to know about. I mean, my main message, I think, to people and what I try to live is just there's so much wonderful stuff around us in everyday life. And, like, you can listen to politics, you can listen to mainstream media, you can read newspapers, or you can totally ignore it. You can actively switch it off if ever it's in your orbit and pay it no attention. Hang out with your friends, keep fit and healthy, do interesting work. You can live the life you want to live. You don't need to pay any attention to any of this crap. And, it's not going to help you. It's not going to change anything. It's certainly not going to help your mental state. It's not going to be looking back on your life. I spent my consciousness, my awareness on these things. Not the way I'd recommend anyone to be. And you've got a choice. It's like politics is force-fed to us like some sort of a sport, Hollywood for ugly people. It gets far more attention than it deserves. You don't need to pay it any attention. Wow. You can choose what you listen to. You can choose what you watch. I'd encourage people just to completely ignore it because it will not benefit your life in any way. Voting totally doesn't matter. Makes no difference, sadly, to anyone's life. So, go and do what you want to do. Go and have fun.
It's all bullshit, isn't it? You laugh because I became an Australian citizen this year after 5 years or so of living here. And I had this really strange experience where I had to go to a council chambers and receive my document that said, you're a citizen of Australia. And I got to take a picture next to the Australian flag with a small little photograph of King Charles. Like, hang on, I've just left England. Like, he's the head of state here. That's weird. And obviously I already knew that, but the main reason for bringing this up is in the same envelope as my nice, citizenship documentation, there's a second piece of paper, which is about voting and about the fact that it's actually illegal not to vote. So
if you're on the electoral roll, yes, but you don't have to be on the electoral roll. So I've told my kids, when you turn 18, do not enroll to vote. Once you're on, it's very hard to get off.
Maybe I could do that. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
always
you don't have to.
Maybe I'm not.
No, I think you have to
look at a piece of
enroll to
paper.
vote, but you might have the option.
Well, it was this extraordinary juxtaposition where basically there was all of this. It's the government's direct communication to new citizens. So what they choose to say to these new citizens is an important way of instilling their values. And like diversity is mentioned like 400 times by this chick.
I hope you did a welcome to country. I hope you welcomed them to the country.
They welcomed everyone to the country.
Yeah. They need you welcome to the country.
And then the national anthem, and it talks about liberty and
young and
also
free.
the young and free. This is the same country that locked me in my house for a number of days for not doing the medical intervention that they wanted. It's all bullshit, isn't it? So I love that. The idea that you just unplug. I think that's pretty cool, actually. And as an approach, do you remember a time when you started doing that more? And how have things changed for you on a day-to-day basis when that's been the case?
Yeah, I suppose I was always kind of pretty busy with career and then obviously family. So I never was a massive kind of news follower. But I think you do. You sort of get you get a sense of politics as you're growing up, and there's one side and the other side, and that kind of thing. And I suppose you have beliefs kind of instilled into you of what's more aligned with your personal and your family philosophies. But yeah, mate, it's really just the more you look at, the more it is just absolute nonsense. Like there's so many absurdities.
Mm.
So it's like, well, you don't need to pay attention to any of these absurdities. Like I'm getting brain damage just like listening to so much of this stuff. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'll live or die by my own choices. All that, that's fine. And I'm just going to hang out and think about and direct my awareness towards things that bring, I suppose, joy or fulfillment. And it's only one life.
But it's this sense of like independent thinking that's so important. It's like, actually, hang on, what is this merry-go-round that I'm part of? And is it actually something that's helping me feel better, or is it not? And everyone's got to go through that process for themselves to see where they end up. Well, what I'd love to ask you about is, you touched on the idea of interesting work. Now, you've already talked through a couple of the different areas that you've worked in over the years. Bitcoin, the day that I understood how it functions as a savings technology, and when I understood the idea of time preference and how it helps you to have more, you have a rosier outlook, essentially. You're able to be more positive, more long-term. What does interesting work look like to you today?
To me, yeah. So I am very happy to talk with anyone about Bitcoin. So I like doing that. People who are kind of genuinely interested in talking about Bitcoin and learning about it. I've had a fair bit of experience of that over the years, and from sort of bumbling along and totally screwing it up early days to being hopefully a bit better in listening to people, where they're at, what their kind of pain points are in life, what their perhaps philosophies might be in terms of politics, or what they care about. Are they more of a sort of left-leaning and concerned about the environment? Are they more sort of right-wing, low-tax, whatever? So just getting an understanding of what individual people care about in that sense. I think the best way to learn about Bitcoin, I'm firmly convinced, is just through one-on-one conversations, because there's so much misinformation out there, and often finding Bitcoin in early days, and it's still very, very early days, is just having someone in your circle who has some expertise in Bitcoin and can sit you down, answer all of your questions, and point you in the direction of good resources in terms of books, podcasts. What software do I use? Where do I buy Bitcoin from? How do I think about it? Just those sorts of, I guess, relatively basic concepts, but are just so fundamental to having a good experience in Bitcoin and in avoiding some of the pitfalls. So I love doing that with people. There are some organizations that are kind of looking at getting into Bitcoin, so I've had some conversations there, and I might start some consulting work in that area as those things come along. And otherwise, it's really, I guess, volunteer work. I'm doing a bit of that. So I joined the committee of my lads' AFL football club, and there's been a fair bit to kind of get across, getting up to speed on that. And just, other things, other kind of sporting and other kind of, I guess, children-related activities where volunteer organisations, and they're such wonderful organisations and such a wonderful experience that they give so many kids, but none of it happens unless people, parents put their hand up and say, I'll do that. So I feel like, we've kind of been very lucky over the years with the sort of stuff our kids have been able to do. And it is important that for those who can make a contribution to preserve and grow what those organisations are, that, if the opportunity comes to contribute, then you go ahead and do that.
I love the idea that, like, when you get far enough down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, just teaching people about Bitcoin is the highest ROI thing you can do with your time. Like, how cool is that? You don't actually need to start a company. You don't need to start a podcast. You just have to tell people that come up in your life around you, and that's valuable enough. And your purchasing power continues to grow in the background. It's absolutely true that no one knows about it yet.
Yes.
And so this idea of being like when you say we're very early, like, how do you think that through?
Oh, what's the fundamental value of Bitcoin? We could speculate it's hundreds of millions of dollars per coin, billions of dollars per coin over time. It'll take decades or however long to get there. But that's how early we are. So who knows the future? There's one case that says, the percentage gains in fiat terms won't be as high as they were in the early days. May be true. But also you've got that risk that sits there of hyperinflation. So the way the monetary system is, the economic system, it's kind of like two massive tectonic plates pushing up against each other. On one hand, you've got deflation, so huge amounts of debt. If that implodes, you've got a massive deflationary force. The other hand, you've got money printing and the kind of imperative that new money be created for this current financial system to keep going. So you kind of got those two tectonic plates pushing up against each other. Hyperinflationary scenario, that's the S-curve that goes parabolic for things like Bitcoin, gold, real estate, stocks, everything that's not commodities, everything that's not nailed down will go to the moon, obviously, in that kind of scenario. Do we get that, or do we get the big deflation event? The forces, those tectonic forces in my analogy, are building. So, and I wouldn't want to speculate which way that ends up going. It's impossible to know. But it's we may well get the bigger percentage gains in fiat terms, perhaps even bigger than the early days. But either way, I think that the protocol, the Bitcoin protocol, the support around it, the software, the knowledge, and just the sort of systems generally are far more robust and resilient than they were in the early days. So I think that whereas in the early days you'd perhaps be reluctant to put your life savings into Bitcoin, I think there are a lot of people these days who do feel comfortable allocating quite a significant proportion of their savings, their sort of in investable money into the Bitcoin protocol. So the conclusion from all that is perhaps the percentage returns aren't as high, but in terms of the dollar returns, they may well be higher because you're more comfortable putting a greater amount of capital into it.
There's so many metrics I can look at that will tell me that actually we're just right at the very start. There's only a handful of S&P 500 companies that own Bitcoin. Literally, like maybe even 1-2%. It's like, well, okay, that's the engine room of the economic marketplace, and currently Bitcoin isn't in any of them. It's not you or I, retail investors on the street, that are going to really move the needle when it comes to like massive allocation. It's the organizations that actually have big balance sheets. But yeah, it's an interesting one to think through. Nathan, I touched this at the very start, but was the idea of like school. You have mentioned a couple of times that you're already, you're a parent. I love the idea of volunteering for my son's sports team when that time comes 10 years from now. What are some of the philosophies that you've picked up from these rabbit holes, shall we say, that have filtered through into your parenting? Because I need to learn these. You're 10, 15 years ahead of me in that sense.
It's the old story of all I bring to the table is a lifetime of mistakes. Well, look, let's start with nutrition, right? Set your kids up for a good day at school, set them up for a good life, set them up for a good physical and mental health and fitness through feeding them well. Put good food in the fridge, cook them good food. And by that, we would say, my elder daughter has a very heavy meat diet, so she would be pretty close to carnivore, and she feels good when she's eating that way. And my other two kids, they eat a fair bit of meat, but they eat other things as well, fruits and stuff that they find goes well for them. None of them would have like rice bubbles for breakfast, that kind of thing. So there's basic things you can do there just by feeding them well. Like it sort of all starts with that, their health and mental alertness and the kind of enjoyment of the day. I think a lot of it comes from eating well and having good options that you as the parent, you're the one doing the shopping, you're going to the butcher's, you're going to the supermarket, you're not buying certain things, or maybe those certain things are a treat now and again, and there's an understanding and mentality, okay, that's a treat, and this is sort of the base of what we eat, and make that tasty and attractive. That's a big part of it. Yeah, they get fed, a bit of nonsense at school, a fair bit, perhaps. And then the attitude I've always taken with that is, okay, this is what you learn at school. Let's sort of think through that from first principles and work out, does it make sense? What are the flaws in that? Why are you being told that? Does that benefit you, in your life, like thinking that way? Jake, as you know, maybe 5%, 10% of what you need to succeed in the real world, you might learn at school. And how much stuff are we taught at school, or it just drops out of our head. You remember it to get an exam mark, and it drops out of your head. The stuff I learned on my own, I remember. Yeah. And it's all
that's
so
the work
much
angle of that, isn't it? It's quite like Bitcoin in a sense, the proof of work. Like, well, you actually want to go and learn, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much, information that's presented and things you need to learn and be tested on. And I just think, for what? Why? And it's all presented out of context. Like, we're doing history. Bang. Oh, okay, history's over. 60 minutes is up. Now we're doing science. Oh, never mind, we were right in the middle of a fascinating discussion on history that could have gone on for another hour. We could have really explored into it. Oh, no, bang, there's the bell. So much information kind of out of context. And then, so these things you just think, why is this being taught? And for some kids, okay, we're learning about biology. That this kid wants to be a doctor. Fine, that's relevant. So another kid's, I don't know, they're going to be like a content producer for some social media platform, or God knows what by the time these guys get out. That stuff's completely irrelevant and uninteresting to them. So there's a lot of stuff of like that I just look at it, why are we learning this? But, it's sort of to get the ticket to get into university, or maybe get the ticket to a job, and that's sort of the path that many take, and that's like a lower risk path. But I definitely encourage people who have a bent towards, say, trades, or, they want to become a baker, or they've got a real passion for something, follow that. Drop the study of maths as quickly as you can. Drop so much of the stuff that will be not helpful to you if you have a passion, because, mate, as we know, like, to have half a chance of succeeding at something in life, you've got to be super passionate about it, and you've got to be good about it. The world's too competitive.
You've got to take a long time doing it.
Yeah, get started.
It takes ages.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's great advice. And obviously, stupid example, but when you become a baker, or whatever it is you dream about doing, and you're like, okay, well, how much flour goes into this recipe? And suddenly you're using numbers. And therefore, the maths class that you were sat in, where they're trying to teach you about Pythagoras, it's fucking useless in the real world, in those examples. So I think probably one of the things that I've loved doing is learning to learn, if that makes sense. Because actually that's the kind of default. Now, let's say you're well fed, you're well slept.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I'm a problem solving machine. And I just got to go out in the world and solve some problems, and I'll get paid for my time, and I'll get to do some cool stuff. And that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But yeah, we're very close to the idea of homeschooling. So at least until they're like 10 years old, maybe.
Definitely a good one to experiment with. Yep. We've not done that. Yep. And I have got so much respect for people who do it.
We haven't yet.
And I think
that's the point.
Well, look,
my eldest is 4.5. They could end up going to a primary school or whatever.
Yeah. And my nephew, for example, 2 very intelligent nephews, and I think particularly the elder one's had some home schooling in his time. He's going back to a high school. I've got a good friend in Brisbane Brisbane area that I respect tremendously. His lad also had some homeschooling and is now going into a high school. So it's sort of horses for courses, and just play it as it goes. But yeah, I think that mentality as you talk about of the confidence to be able to learn and the resources that are out there, thank you to the internet, of course.
Yeah, the internet changes everything.
Yeah, you can learn anything. It's a wonderful time for these kids and all of us really to be alive. Like anything you want to go learn, you can learn and sort of synthesize information and techniques and philosophies from people who are absolute expert in niche fields, and pull it all together and make that part of what you know and what you do. So it's awesome. An exciting time.
And that's a very inspiring message. It's actually one of the reasons that I love the podcasting so much, is because you end up down these rabbit holes where you're learning from people that have actually done this stuff. And you're like, awesome, great story. On which note, Nathan, we're going to finish up the conversation for today. Thank you very much for sharing everything. Is there anywhere that you would suggest people can reach out to you, or they can get in touch with me and I'll send them your email or something? Yeah,
we finished on a positive, Jake. So well done you and me for that, hey? We did that. I'm a relatively private person. I have quite a low profile, as you know, by design. I guess people can get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with me on any particular issue. But I don't know that I really have anything to sort of teach or offer anyone. There's people who know that stuff in far greater depth and skill than I do. But happy to help or point people in the right direction.
Exactly. And I always like to give people the option. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Jake. Great work.